You have everything you're supposed to want. Not everything in some greedy, impossible, never satisfied sense, but the basics, the reasonable version of the good life. A roof, food, a phone that connects you to the entire accumulated knowledge of human civilization in seconds. Entertainment available at any hour in quantities no previous generation could imagine. Safety, convenience, options. And yet, there's something off, something that sits just beneath the surface of all that comfort and convenience and refuses to be quiet about it. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It arrives in the gaps, the quiet Sunday afternoons that feel inexplicably flat, the moments after finishing something you'd been looking forward to that feel emptier than you expected, the late evenings when the scrolling stops being satisfying, but you keep doing it anyway because stopping means sitting with something you can't quite name. It arrives in the vague, persistent feeling that something important is missing, that you're going through the right motions in the right order and arriving somewhere that doesn't feel quite right, that the life you're living, comfortable as it is, functional as it is, fine as it is somehow not fully yours, somehow not quite alive. You're not depressed exactly. You're not ungrateful exactly. You're not even necessarily unhappy in any way you could clearly explain to someone else. You're just hollow in a way that more comfort doesn't fix, in a way that the next convenience, the next upgrade, the next optimization of your already pretty comfortable life doesn't touch. Friedrich Nietzsche, a man who spent most of his adult life in genuine physical pain, genuine poverty, and genuine obscurity, predicted this feeling with extraordinary precision more than 100 years ago. Not vaguely, not metaphorically, with the specific, almost uncomfortable accuracy of someone who understood human psychology at a depth that most people never reach. He saw what was coming. He saw a world of increasing comfort, increasing ease, increasing optimization of human experience toward the elimination of friction, difficulty, and struggle. And he looked at that world not with celebration, as most of his contemporaries did, but with something closer to alarm, because what he saw underneath the comfort was a particular kind of spiritual and psychological starvation, a specific type of deadening that happens to human beings when the thing they are built to do, to push, to overcome, to create, to struggle towards something meaningful, is systematically removed from their lives in the name of making things easier. He called the person who emerges from this process the last man, the letzte Mensch. And when Zarathustra, the fictional prophet of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, introduces the last man to the crowd's response is not horror, not recognition, not the uncomfortable awareness of being described. Their response is delight. They cheer. They want to be the last man. They ask, "Make us into last men." That response, that enthusiastic embrace of the very diminishment Nietzsche was warning against, is what made him most despairing about the future. Not that comfort would make people miserable, but that it would make them miserable in a way they couldn't recognize, in a way that felt from the inside like contentment, in a way that had no obvious name, no visible cause, no easy solution, because the problem was not any specific thing that had gone wrong.
The problem was the absence of something that should have been there, the absence of genuine resistance, of genuine effort, of genuine becoming. This video is a direct conversation with that warning, not a biography of Nietzsche, not an academic survey of his philosophy, a direct examination of what he saw about comfort, about growth, about the specific psychological machinery of a human being, and what it means for your life right now, today, in this extraordinarily convenient and deeply unsatisfying moment in history. Some of what follows will be uncomfortable. That's appropriate. Discomfort is, as you're about to understand very well, not the enemy.
Before we get into the specific mechanisms Nietzsche identified, the specific ways that comfort slowly destroys the capacity for genuine living, we need to spend some time understanding the underlying architecture. Why, at a fundamental level, does ease produce hollowness? Why does the removal of difficulty not result in happiness? Because that's the expectation, isn't it? It's the foundational promise of almost every advancement in human civilization for the last several hundred years. Remove the difficulty, make things easier, automate the tedious, optimize the painful, eliminate the friction, and human beings will be happier, will flourish, will finally have what they need. Except they don't. Not in any sustained, meaningful way. You can observe this in historical patterns, the extraordinary material improvements of the last century that have tracked alongside epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, meaninglessness, and what psychologists sometimes call existential vacuum. You can observe it in your own life if you're willing to be honest about it. Nietzsche's explanation for this, and it holds up remarkably well, is that human beings are not primarily pleasure-seeking organisms. This is a crucial misunderstanding at the heart of most modern thinking about well-being. We are not organisms who function best when pleasure is maximized and pain is minimized. We are something more complicated, more interesting, and more demanding than that. We are organisms built for overcoming, for pushing against resistance and expanding past it, for encountering difficulty and developing new capacities in the process of meeting it. The word Nietzsche used was Überwindung, overcoming, transcendence, self-surpassing. And he believed it was not simply a nice option for particularly ambitious people. He believed it was a fundamental need of every living human being, a need as basic in its way as food or connection. And like all fundamental needs, its absence, even in the presence of every other good thing, produces a specific, recognizable form of suffering. Here's the concrete version of this. Think about the last time you were genuinely, deeply engaged in something difficult, not just busy, actually engaged, working on a problem that genuinely required everything you had, learning something that felt, for stretches, completely out of your reach, building something that kept failing and that you kept returning to, having a conversation that required you to actually think, actually reckon with your own position, actually update something you thought you knew. What was the quality of your experience during that time? For most people, the honest answer is alive. Something was activated, something that sits dormant during the easy, scrolling, optimized, frictionless stretches of life was fully switched on. There was discomfort, sometimes significant discomfort, but underneath the discomfort, or alongside it, something that felt like meaning, like you were actually using yourself,
like you are actually there, fully present in your own experience, rather than observing your life from a slight distance while waiting for it to become interesting. This is not coincidence. This is architecture. The human system, however you want to describe it, psychologically or neurologically or philosophically, is designed to produce that quality of experience specifically in response to challenge, to genuine difficulty that requires genuine response, and it is specifically not designed to produce that quality of experience in response to ease. Ease for this system is a signal that no development is required, that you're in a safe zone where nothing new is being built, and the deeper layers of the self respond to that signal with a quietness that, sustained over long enough, becomes indistinguishable from depression. Nietzsche articulated this through his concept of the will to power. Not power over others, this is one of the most persistently misunderstood ideas in all of philosophy. The will to power, as he actually described it, is the fundamental drive in living things toward growth, expansion, self-overcoming. It is the drive to become more than you currently are, to push past your current limits, to encounter resistance and develop new capacities in response to it. When this drive is thwarted, when the environment is so carefully arranged that there is nothing to push against, nothing that requires genuine effort, nothing that demands growth, the drive doesn't simply disappear, it turns inward. It becomes what Nietzsche identified as decadence, a state where the energy of self-overcoming, finding no outward direction, begins to consume the self. Depression, resentment, the strange, sourceless, chronic, low-level suffering of the person who has everything they should want and cannot understand why it isn't enough. You know what this looks like. You may know what it feels like. The question is whether you understand its cause. The cause, according to Nietzsche, is not ungratefulness, not weakness, not a failure to properly appreciate what you have. The cause is structural. The cause is that you have, whether deliberately or by the accumulated effect of choosing ease wherever it's available, removed from your life the very thing that makes you capable of experiencing it as fully yours. The resistance, the difficulty, the specific friction that generates genuine engagement rather than comfortable observation. And the solution, which will become clear in what follows, is not to manufacture suffering arbitrarily, not to make yourself miserable for its own sake, not to perform asceticism as a new form of comfort-seeking. The solution is more precise and ultimately more demanding than that. But first, let's understand exactly how the comfortable life does its work on you. Let's look at the specific mechanisms, the specific ways that ease accumulated across a life produces the particular kind of hollowness that more comfort will never fill.
There is a muscle, not a literal one, but a functional equivalent, that generates the experience of meaning. The sense that what you're doing matters, that your life is pointed towards something, that the effort you're putting in is connected to something larger than the immediate moment. Like all muscles, it grows through use and atrophies through disuse. The connection most people miss, the one Nietzsche saw clearly, is that this muscle is specifically exercised by difficulty, by effortful engagement with things that matter, by the sustained commitment to something that costs you something. And it is specifically not exercised by consumption, by passive entertainment, by the efficient satisfaction of preferences without any genuine engagement. Think about the structure of meaning as it actually appears in human lives,
Not meaning in the abstract philosophical sense, meaning as a lived experience, as the felt sense that your existence is pointed towards something real. Where does it come from? Almost universally, when people describe experiences of genuine meaning, moments where they felt most alive, most engaged, most connected to something that felt important, the experiences have a particular structure. There was effort involved, real effort, not performed effort. Something was at stake. The outcome was uncertain. The person doing the thing was genuinely uncertain whether they would succeed, whether they were capable, whether it would work out. And in the midst of that uncertainty, sustained by something that felt like genuine desire, genuine care, genuine commitment, they continued. That structure, effort, uncertainty, genuine stake, genuine care, is the structure of meaning. It is not the structure of comfort. Comfort is the opposite of uncertainty. Optimization is the removal of stakes. Ease is the elimination of the effort that meaning requires. This is not a claim that suffering is intrinsically meaningful. Nietzsche was not a masochist, and his philosophy was not an invitation to unnecessary pain. The claim is more specific. Meaning requires the genuine expenditure of yourself towards something. It requires actual engagement, actual risk, actual possibility of failure. And when those things are systematically removed from your life in the name of making things easier, when every preference is satisfied efficiently, when every discomfort is promptly resolved, when the environment is optimized to reduce friction at every point, the meaning-generating machinery slowly stops having anything to process. And what you're left with is an experience that has the shape of satisfaction without its substance. You're comfortable, you're entertained, your preferences are being met, but nothing is being built. Nothing is at stake. Nothing requires the particular and irreplaceable quality of you, your specific capacity, your specific determination, your specific willingness to continue when continuation is hard. Nietzsche saw this as a form of spiritual death that arrives before physical death. The person who has arranged their life so carefully around comfort that nothing genuinely requires them, who can move through their days on autopilot, efficiently managing their comfortable existence without ever being genuinely called upon, that person is, in a sense that matters deeply, not fully alive. They are consuming their life rather than living it, observing their existence from a distance rather than fully inhabiting it. The atrophy shows up gradually, one comfortable choice at a time. The difficult book you put down for the easy one, the challenging project you never start because it might fail and the familiar one is available, the hard conversation you avoid because the comfortable silence is right there, the creative risk you decline because the safe option is sufficient. None of these individual choices seems catastrophic. Each one seems entirely reasonable. But accumulated over months and years, they produce a self that has become increasingly unaccustomed to genuine engagement, increasingly intolerant of uncertainty, increasingly dependent on the easy version, and increasingly hollow in ways that the easy version cannot address. The recovery of meaning, Nietzsche's prescription for this specific atrophy, is not complicated, but it is demanding. It requires the deliberate reintroduction of genuine difficulty, not arbitrary suffering, but the specific kind of effort that calls you forward rather than pushes you down, the project that genuinely matters to you and that you genuinely don't know if you can pull off, the skill that will require real time and real failure to develop, the commitment that has actual stakes and demands actual presence. The meaning-generating muscle, once you start using it again, responds. It builds. The quality of experience shifts in a way that is almost immediate and almost physical, a sense of being more fully present, more genuinely engaged, more actually there in your own life. Not comfortable necessarily, but alive in a way that comfort has never quite produced. That aliveness, that specific quality of experience that only engagement with genuine difficulty produces, is what Nietzsche saw as the natural birthright of every human being, and what modern comfort culture has, with the best of intentions, quietly stolen from an enormous number of people who haven't yet figured out what's missing.
Here is something Nietzsche understood about personal identity that is counterintuitive and, once you see it, impossible to unsee. The self is not a fixed thing. It is not a stable core waiting to be discovered, protected, and maintained. It is something that is actively created and actively destroyed by the choices you make and the challenges you either engage with or avoid. The self is, in a very concrete sense, the accumulated result of what you've been willing to do, what you've been willing to risk, what you've been willing to become in the face of difficulty. Which means a life oriented around the avoidance of difficulty is also, whether you intend it or not, a life oriented around the slow erosion of self. This sounds extreme. It's worth unpacking carefully. When you encounter genuine difficulty, and not just endure it, but actually engage with it, push through it, allow yourself to be changed by it, something happens in you that is genuinely irreversible. You become someone who has done that thing, who has faced that particular difficulty, and found in the facing new capacities you didn't have before. The self that existed after that encounter is meaningfully different from the self that existed before it, not just in terms of what you can do, in terms of what you are. This is what Nietzsche meant by self-overcoming, not overcoming others, overcoming the previous version of yourself, the limits, the fears, the patterns of retreat that defined who you were before the difficulty arrived. The person on the other side of genuine challenge is a different person from the one who entered it. The self has been expanded, made more specific, more capable, more particular. Now run the opposite process. A life organized around comfort, around the consistent preference for ease over challenge, is one in which this process of expansion never happens, or happens so rarely and so mildly that the effect is negligible. The self, in the absence of the friction that defines and develops it, begins to blur, to lose specificity, to become less particular, less capable, less distinctive from the general mass of people living similar comfortable lives. And this is where the hollow feeling comes from in its deepest form. Not from the absence of pleasure. Pleasure is plentiful in a comfortable life. Not from the absence of satisfaction. Small satisfactions are constantly available. From the absence of a self that feels genuinely, specifically, irreplaceably yours. The self that has never been tested doesn't know what it's made of, and on some level, not consciously, not articulately, but in the deep background of experience, you feel that. The vague sense that you don't quite know who you are. That the identity you present to the world is a collection of preferences and habits and inherited patterns rather than anything genuinely built. That if the circumstances changed dramatically, if the comfort was taken away, if something genuinely difficult arrived, you wouldn't know who would show up to meet it. This uncertainty about the self is one of the most destabilizing experiences available to a human being, and it's also one of the most underdiagnosed. People attribute it to all kinds of things: anxiety, depression, existential confusion, without identifying the actual cause, the absence of the genuine self-building that difficulty makes possible and ease makes impossible. Nietzsche saw this clearly in the culture of his time and projected it forward with remarkable accuracy. He saw a world where the comfortable, frictionless life was becoming available to more and more people, and those people, rather than flourishing in their newfound ease, were becoming progressively less themselves, more generic, more interchangeable, more dependent on external structure to tell them what to want, who to be, how to spend their days. Because in the absence of the internal structure built by genuine challenge, external structure is the only alternative. The last man in Nietzsche's description has no genuine self. He has preferences, he has habits, he has the comfortable average of what everyone around him wants and values and believes. But he has no specific, hard-won, genuinely particular self that has been tempered by difficulty and therefore knows its own shape. The recovery from this is not quick and it is not comfortable. It requires the deliberate encounter with challenges that force the question, who is it that shows up here? What am I actually made of? What can I actually endure, create, withstand, achieve? These are not pleasant questions to be uncertain about, but the uncertainty, the genuine not knowing that precedes genuine discovery, is far less corrosive than the alternative, than a life spent in the comfortable avoidance of the very experiences that would tell you who you actually are. The self wants to know itself, and it can only know itself through what it does, what it survives, what it builds. Give it nothing genuine to do, survive, or build, and it will quietly begin to disappear. Not all at once, gradually, in the specific way that things atrophy when they're not used, until the hollow feeling, which was always its voice trying to tell you it needed something, becomes the primary tone of a life that looks, from the outside, perfectly comfortable. This one is counterintuitive. Maybe the most counterintuitive thing in this entire conversation. Comfortable people are, in certain very specific ways, among the most resentful. Not all comfortable people, not as a universal law, but there is a specific kind of resentment that a life organized around comfort breeds, quietly, steadily, invisibly, that is worth understanding because it is one of the primary drivers of the particular misery Nietzsche was diagnosing. Here's the mechanism. When you arrange your life around the avoidance of discomfort, you are, whether you realize it or not, making a constant series of small surrenders. Not dramatic surrenders, not surrenders that feel like failure or defeat at the time. Small ones. The choice not to try the difficult thing, the choice to take the easier path, the choice to avoid the conversation, the risk, the challenge, the creative leap that might fail. Each of these small surrenders is individually painless. The whole point is that they're comfortable. But each one also involves, on some level below conscious awareness, the experience of not being fully yourself, of not meeting the thing you could have met, of choosing the version of yourself that was smaller and safer over the version that would have required growth. And what accumulates beneath the comfort is a particular kind of self-directed resentment, not articulated resentment, not a resentment you can name or address directly, a background feeling of having let yourself down,
of being in some quiet but persistent way disappointed in yourself, of knowing, without being able to say it clearly, that you are living below the level of what you're actually capable of. This resentment, because it can't be addressed directly, because its source is too diffuse, too accumulated, too woven into the texture of daily comfortable life, gets redirected. It finds external targets. The successful person who is annoying to be around, the person who took the risk you didn't take, the system that you feel is holding you back, the circumstances that explain why you haven't done the thing you keep meaning to do. Nietzsche had a specific word for this phenomenon, ressentiment, and he traced it with extraordinary precision both in individual psychology and cultural history. Ressentiment, the particular kind of resentment that arises not from a specific external injustice, but from the internal experience of not living up to your own possibility, is, in his analysis, one of the most corrosive forces in human psychology. Because it compounds, because it attaches to new targets constantly, because it provides an endless supply of external explanations for an internal condition, and because, crucially, it can never be resolved by addressing the external targets. The comfortable person who resents the people around him for their success, for their confidence, for their apparent aliveness, that person's resentment will not be resolved by those people becoming less successful. It will not be resolved by circumstances improving. It will not be resolved by anything external, because nothing external is its actual source. Its source is the gap, the distance between the life being lived and the life that could be lived, between the choices being made and the choices that would actually require something, between the self being maintained and the self that genuine difficulty would build. And the only thing that actually addresses it, the only resolution that works at the level where the resentment actually lives, is closing that gap, making different choices, engaging with the difficulty instead of organizing life around avoiding it, experiencing, even imperfectly and gradually, what it feels like to actually use yourself, to actually be challenged and to actually meet that challenge. The resentment doesn't disappear instantly when this happens, but it begins to have less fuel, because the self that is genuinely engaging with difficulty, that is building something real, that is encountering genuine resistance and developing genuine capacity in response, that self has less reason to feel quietly, persistently disappointed in itself. Nietzsche's observation here was both compassionate and severe. The comfortable person who can't understand why they feel so much unexplained resentment is not simply weak or ungrateful. They are experiencing the entirely predictable psychological consequence of a life that has been systematically under-challenged. The resentment is information. It is pointing, with uncomfortable accuracy, at exactly what is missing. The question is whether you're willing to let it point there, rather than redirecting it outward towards easier targets, rather than adding more comfort to try to drown it out, actually following it to its source and doing something about what you find there.
This one is subtle, and it's devastating. When a life is organized primarily around comfort and ease, something happens to the relationship with time that is rarely discussed but deeply significant. The future stops feeling like a place where something new could happen. It begins to feel like a continuation of the present. Maybe slightly more comfortable, maybe slightly more optimized, but fundamentally the same. More of what's already here. And when the future stops feeling genuinely open, when it stops feeling like a place where you could become meaningfully different from who you are now, something essential goes out of the present too. Here is the psychology of this. The human experience of time is not neutral. How the future feels, whether it feels open, expansive, genuinely alive with possibility, fundamentally shapes how the present feels. A present that is connected to a genuinely open future has a different quality than a present that leads only to more present. It has direction. It has a sense of becoming. It feels, even in its ordinary moments, like part of something unfolding. The comfortable life, by its nature, tends to close this, not through any catastrophic event, through the gradual accumulation of the preference for the familiar over the new, the certain over the uncertain, the safe over the risky. Each individual preference is reasonable, but the accumulated effect is a life that increasingly resembles itself from year to year, that has, beneath the surface of whatever changes in circumstances, a remarkable sameness in its fundamental structure. And the self that inhabits this life, the self that has been making consistent, comfortable choices for long enough, begins to sense at a level below articulatory that the future is not really coming, that there is no genuine becoming on the horizon, that whatever new version of themselves was waiting on the other side of genuine effort and genuine risk is becoming, with each passing comfortable year, less accessible, less imaginable, more definitively unreached. Nietzsche's concept of the eternal recurrence, the thought experiment where you imagine your life repeating forever, exactly as it is most devastating precisely here. For the person whose comfortable life has slowly closed their future, the eternal recurrence is not a thought experiment, it is the actual felt experience of time, the sense that this is it, that this is what the rest will look like, that the becoming that was always supposed to happen at some point in the future has quietly been cancelled by the accumulation of comfortable choices in the present. This is why the hollow feeling often arrives with particular force on Sunday afternoons, or at the end of holidays, or in the quiet after something that was supposed to be exciting. Because in those moments, the gap between the life being lived and the life that could be lived becomes briefly visible. The future's closedness becomes briefly felt. And then the scroll, the next episode, the next distraction comes, not because the person is lazy or shallow, but because the alternative, sitting with the full weight of that gap, is almost unbearable. Nietzsche's remedy for the closed future, at its heart, is about reopening the relationship with possibility, not through positive thinking or optimistic reframing, through the actual physical, embodied experience of attempting something difficult and finding in the attempting that you are still capable of more than you thought, that the future is not closed, that there is still becoming available if you're willing to do what becoming requires. This is what he meant when he talked about the Übermensch, the overman, not as a finished product, not as a superhuman endpoint, but as an orientation, a way of relating to your own existence, a way that always points forward, that is always in the process of exceeding what was before, that experiences time not as a container being filled with more of the same, but as a medium in which something genuinely new is continuously being created. The loss of that orientation, the settling into the comfortable life that leads only to more comfortable life, is, in Nietzsche's analysis, one of the deepest losses available to a human being,
because it is the loss of genuine futurity, the loss of the sense that you are not yet finished, that what you are now is not all that you could be. And it arrives so quietly, one comfortable choice at a time.
Here we arrive at the most fundamental level of the problem. The layer beneath the atrophy of meaning, beneath the erosion of self, beneath the quiet resentment and the closed future. The thing that in Nietzsche's analysis is actually being destroyed by the comfortable life, the will. Not willpower in the shallow sense of resisting temptation, the will in a deeper sense, the fundamental capacity of a person to want something with genuine intensity, to be pulled toward something, to feel the specific urgency of genuine desire, to experience the particular energy of a self that knows what it's for and is moving toward it. This is what Nietzsche saw the comfortable life slowly eliminating, not through any single dramatic event, but through the accumulation of a specific kind of experience, the experience of having every preference efficiently satisfied, of never having to wait, to strive, to endure the productive frustration of wanting something you don't yet have and working over time toward having it. When preferences are satisfied immediately and consistently, when the gap between wanting and having is perpetually minimized, the wanting itself begins to lose its character. Desires flatten. Preferences become more interchangeable. The specific, intense, directional quality of genuine desire, the kind that has a shape, that points somewhere definite, that motivates sustained effort over time, fades into a more generalized orientation toward whatever is immediately available and comfortable. You've probably noticed this, the way that easy, immediate access to almost anything has made almost nothing feel particularly worth having. The way that being able to watch any movie ever made immediately makes it strangely hard to want to watch anything specifically. The way that having access to almost any food at any time has somehow made eating less satisfying, not more. The way that the elimination of waiting has also eliminated something that turned out to be essential to the experience of anticipation, of genuine desire, of the satisfaction that comes from finally having something you worked toward. Nietzsche would not be surprised by any of this. He understood, before the age of instant delivery and infinite content and on-demand everything, that the suppression of genuine desire through immediate satisfaction was a profound form of damage to the human organism. Not because he was an ascetic or believed suffering was inherently valuable, because he understood that desire, genuine, specific, sustained desire for something, is the engine of becoming. It is what pulls you forward, what makes the effort worth making, what gives the difficulty its meaning and the achievement its depth. Strip the desire of its urgency, satisfy every preference before it develops into genuine longing, and you strip the self of its forward momentum. You produce a person who wants things in a shallow, ambient way, but desires nothing in the deep, specific, driving sense that generates genuine self-overcoming. A person who consumes rather than creates, who drifts rather than moves, who lives, as Nietzsche would say, without a real why,
and therefore without the resilience to endure any significant how. He connected this to what he called nihilism, not the dramatic philosophical proclamation that nothing matters, but the quieter, more personal experience of not quite knowing what you're for, of having the machinery of wanting without a specific object that activates it fully, of moving through a life that has plenty of content but no genuine direction. This, in Nietzsche's analysis, is the final product of a life organized around comfort. Not suffering, comfort is real and it persists. Not even unhappiness in any simple sense, something more specific and in some ways more terrible. A self that has lost its genuine will, that wants comfort, wants entertainment, wants the preferences satisfied, but doesn't know what it actually wants, what it would sacrifice for, what it would endure difficulty to reach, what would get it out of bed with something like urgency rather than the weary momentum of routine. The will that Nietzsche valued, the will to power in its truest sense, is the will that says, this is worth pushing through resistance for. This is worth the discomfort, the uncertainty, the possible failure. This is what I am actually for. That will is not found by looking inward in a comfortable, undemanding environment. It is discovered through the specific encounter with genuine difficulty. It emerges, sometimes explosively, sometimes gradually, in the experience of actually trying something that requires you to be more than you currently are. The comfortable life doesn't provide this encounter by design. That's what makes it comfortable, and that, in the end, is what makes it dangerous.
So, you've been sitting with a lot of Nietzsche for the last however long this has taken. A lot of difficult ideas about what comfort does to the human being who chooses it consistently and unconsciously. A lot of uncomfortable implications for lives, possibly including yours, that look fine from the outside but feel hollow from the inside. What do you do with all of it? First, a clarification that Nietzsche himself would insist on. None of this is an argument for making yourself miserable, for choosing the difficult option arbitrarily, for performing suffering as a kind of philosophical fashion. He had contempt for that, actually, for what he called the ascetic ideal in its worst form, where the rejection of comfort becomes itself a comfort, a new identity, a new way of avoiding genuine engagement by performing the appearance of it. The point is never difficulty for its own sake. The point is the specific difficulty that calls to something genuine in you, the challenge that your particular capacities are suited to meet and that requires you to genuinely develop in order to meet it, the project that matters to you specifically and that you genuinely don't know if you can pull off, the commitment that has real stakes and demands real presence and will actually build something in the world, in your craft, in yourself, if you see it through. The difference between productive difficulty and mere suffering is direction. Productive difficulty is pointing somewhere. It is in service of something that matters to you. It is connected to your particular why, the thing you would do even if it were harder, even if it were less comfortable, even if the outcome were uncertain, because the doing of it is part of what makes your life feel genuinely yours. That why, if you've been living primarily for comfort and convenience for long enough, may not be immediately obvious.
The will that was supposed to point you toward it has been muted by the steady, efficient satisfaction of preferences that never required anything of it. Finding it again is not quick work. But it begins, and Nietzsche was very specific about this, with a deliberate reintroduction of the kind of experience that the comfortable life systematically removes, the experience of genuine effort, of not knowing if you can do something and trying anyway, of caring enough about something to be willing to be bad at it for a while, of showing up to something difficult and finding over time who it is that shows up. There is a question, he suggested, not gently but with urgency, for evaluating the choices available to you. Not, is this comfortable? Not even, is this what I want? But if this moment, this specific moment, this specific day were to repeat forever, exactly as it is, would I choose it again? Not because it's easy, because it's mine, because it reflects something genuine about what I actually value and who I'm actually trying to become. That question, taken seriously, applied honestly, is one of the most clarifying things available to a person who has been living on autopilot in a comfortable life, because it cuts through the noise of preferences and habits and inherited patterns and asks very simply, is this actually the direction you want to be moving? If the answer is yes, even partially, even imperfectly, then you have something to build on. If the answer is no, if the honest application of that question reveals a gap between the life being lived and the life that would feel genuinely chosen, then you have, at minimum, clarity about what needs to change. Nietzsche believed that clarity, even painful clarity, even the clarity that reveals how far from genuine engagement you've drifted, is infinitely more valuable than comfortable confusion, because confused comfort keeps you exactly where you are. Painful clarity, at least, shows you the direction. His whole philosophy was, in the end, a sustained argument for the value of genuine living over comfortable existing, for the specific, difficult, irreplaceable experience of being fully engaged in your own life, for the aliveness that cannot be faked, cannot be purchased, cannot be optimized into, that only comes from actually using yourself, actually pushing against something real, actually showing up to the difficulty and finding on the other side something that couldn't have been found any other way. The comfortable life promises a lot. It delivers a great deal of what it promises. What it cannot deliver, what no amount of additional ease will ever provide, is that aliveness, that specific quality of experience that belongs only to the person who is genuinely, presently, effortfully engaged in becoming more than they were. That is what Nietzsche was pointing at. That is what the hollow feeling is pointing at. And that, if you let it, is where to start.